Reverse climate change.
Nurture biodiversity.
Balancing the environment and food production.
Restore grasslands.
Improve yields.
Revitalise local economies.
Regenerative production. Preserve traditional knowledge.
Increase resilience.
Supply the circular economy.
Clean air, clear water.
Hello and welcome to Galbraith at the Royal Highland Showcase. As COP26 comes to Scotland and legislation demanding that we are net zero by 2050, there is a requirement of farmers to meet net zero legislation. Put simply, net zero is the balance between greenhouse gas production and emissions. The industry will face the challenges and we must embrace it. We have no choice but to embrace this, and we're already seeing suppliers putting demands on us. Morrisons have just introduced a policy whereby all production received from UK agriculture will be net zero by 2030. This will have an impact as early as 2022, with them selling net zero eggs. And their ambition is to be selling net zero beef by 2025. UK agriculture is responsible for 10% of overall UK greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, we have a duty in which to mitigate what we are currently emitting and turn that round and reverse climate change and do our part. Over the next 30 minutes, the team from Galbraith will give demonstrations and discussions about what can be achieved, the opportunities and the way that we must look forward. If after the event you have any queries or questions regarding what you've listened to, then please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. Thank you for watching.
So we've come up to the top of the farm up in the Angus Glens, and there's a lot to look at. There's pasture and there's moorland. We can hear curlew and peewit. There's woodland, there's hedgerows. We're standing on a road, but it's not always looked like this, has it? Tell us about how you've been managing this area and how it's changed.
Yes, so the current owner who bought the place about 7 years ago inherited this place, and it was completely open. All the infrastructure that you can see he's put in, so the roads, the fencing, the hedges, and the woodland that you can see behind you as well, that's all been put in.
And what benefits has this had for the natural capital, the environment, the biodiversity, and the carbon capture of this farm? Yes,
we've done a lot here that's improved the biodiversity of the holding. For example, the hedgerows that have been put in, and also another example, the paddock behind you, that was species-rich grassland. So it's really enhanced what was here from when it was bought.
But this is also an active farm business. We've got sheep, and we've got timber growing, we've got crops being grown. Has the work for the environment detracted from the farm business, or is it enhancing it?
Very much enhanced it, actually. The hedgerows, which have come with the fencing, they have allowed us to break up the area into smaller parcels, which means the grazing rotation has improved significantly. The species-rich grassland that you can see behind you, that's allowed for a much better quality of grass. And as far as the management and the production of the holding, that's increased too. We've had a better lambing percentage due to the fact that there's better grass to eat and the shelter from the hedges, things like that.
And we've got a river down here. Tell me about how you're managing the riparian areas.
The river has been fenced off, so no livestock can access it. It's managed as a water margin, so it's been left for natural regeneration, which will help with the diffuse pollution and also carbon capture.
What do you mean by regenerative agriculture?
It's adopting the practices to improve both soil quality and cut down the soil degraded capacities. thereby enhancing carbon sequestration and water quality.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, the four main principles are reducing tillage, improving livestock management, improving biodiversity, and reducing the need for artificial fertilisers.
So should there be a soil carbon code?
Yeah, I think inevitably there will be and should be. There's no doubt we'll need incentives to go into regenerative agriculture. It's a difficult subject. It's fiercely debated, and some people have bought into the principles already and are adopting regenerative agriculture, and they're actually seeing the financial benefits themselves. But for the mainstream farmers and the majority of us to move into regenerative agriculture, we will need to be incentivised. Whether that incentivisation comes from the public sector or the private sector will be another matter. Certainly through a soil carbon code where we're measuring the carbon in our soils, then yeah, we've an ability to get a carbon credit, a lot like the peatland carbon code and the woodland carbon code. If that's available, then that will be a credit that can either be used for a business to become net zero, or in fact utilised to sell in the open market in a bid to try and get some of the initial investments that you put into regenerative agriculture back.
I've got a bonus question. Should farmers be looking to use a natural capital assessment to start to understand all these very complicated and diverse risks and opportunities and potential of their land?
Yeah, I think that we should. It should, most businesses should be getting a carbon audit done. Why? Because we will have to set net zero targets. We will have to hit them, and that's not something that government will necessarily stipulate. That will be something that the industry states. So as we're producing our fruit or our vegetables or our cereals, actually our buyers in the future will be looking to see that we are carbon net zero. So yes, a carbon audit now to identify actually what one's footprint is, to see how much one needs to offset, and an assessment of the natural cattle assets that lie on the estate or farm is a further sector of it, where we can identify offset opportunities. And actually we've all got an obligation to increase the biodiversity on our holdings. There is benefits from increasing bird life, for example, in that becomes our natural pesticide. So in many ways that will reduce the need for chemical applications.
One of the points to know is at Galbraith now we're actually undertaking carbon audits for clients, and have done to date so far, undertaking general assessments of the assets that are on the farm and effectively the level of carbon sequestration currently being generated by businesses. So it's something that we are actively doing right now and have done for clients, and it's something we're being asked weekly, almost daily, about carbon audits getting undertaken to take advantage of the progressing carbon market moving forward.
I think that's it. We are seeing any management meetings that we have, that there is a net zero is on the agenda now, because it's a discussion that needs to take place now for businesses to adjust and adapt, rather than simply putting the blindfolds on and waiting for the last minute when it could be too late.
And I think overarching agriculture at the moment is the changing subsidy and how that could change things. So that is engaging landowners and farmers to look at their assets. Farmers have huge potential with regards carbon sequestration, environmental management. So the likely change to farming subsidies is causing them to ask us, and indeed themselves, these questions, re how they move forward, natural capital, carbon sequestration, and indeed regenerative agriculture.
I think it's also interesting, I got asked a question recently you know, is the farming world ready to embrace this change? And actually, of course it is, and farming has always had to adapt and change. Subsidies are about to change. As a result of that, we will naturally need to change what we do. But above all, actually, some of us have been managing our natural capital assets in a way that we are, in effect, protecting the environment. And so I think that there's a misconception that the industry's got a massive leap to take. It doesn't. I think it's a step change. It's a slow introduction of, more habitat management, the increase of biodiversity around the farm. But those things are actually just a simple step change of what we're already doing. It's not, I think there's a misconception out there that we're in the doldrums in it, and we're somehow years behind technology.
That's good. And if you look at where we are on the farm here at the moment, we're surrounded by hedgerows which have been created, which effectively are now aiding towards the potential for mob grazing systems on this unit, which is effectively high intensity, short duration grazing patterns. It's a huge topic, mob grazing, but the farmer here has begun and commenced environmental management, but it's working alongside food production, improving resilience, improving efficiencies. So the mob grazing principle is effectively ready to be implemented as a result of increasing environmental management through the hedgerows.
So this might not be completely new radical ideas for farmers. This might be returning to older ideas or traditional methods, or developing ways of farming that they already know about.
Some would say it's taking the intensity out of farming. I don't think that's necessarily right. I think it's just adapting the principles that we have, and actually maybe putting a wee bit more thought into our farming practices, and yes, adopting more traditional elements. I mean, we talked earlier about reintroducing some livestock into an arable situation that's got to be healthy from the manure that goes onto the fields. That's all a natural cycle.
So will this translate into higher productivity, higher yields?
I think on a livestock basis, I think there's huge potential through mob grazing to reduce feed inputs in particular, improve health, regular movement of livestock on set patterns is going to hopefully reduce that disease pressure through the year, but at the same turn it should maintain the level of output to the existing system. So there's no doubt it takes time, and it's going to take time to adopt these principles, but our advice would be certainly to have a go. Every farm is different, they have different drivers, different topography, different people, but I would recommend giving it a go and look at the potential, because there is potential gains to be had.
I think going back to your question, Eleanor, you talked about yields. I mean, yields in arable crops have stagnated. We've failed to actually get the average yields or record yields up, and I think that's a stark reminder that actually we haven't been treating our soils well, and that we do need to pay more attention to biodiversity in the soils. They are degraded, and actually, through the use of cover crops, strip tillage or minimum tillage, it doesn't suit every soil type. I accept that, but there's an answer for every unit and every farm. So, I think adopting some of these practices in a slow, sustainable fashion will certainly see improvements to yields.
I think we've touched upon forestry and the potential, peatland and the potential it has for carbon sequestration. We certainly think soils has a huge part to play in carbon sequestration, and grass is the majority land cover type in Scotland, and so it should have a great part to play in policy, carbon, natural capital principles moving forward.
So we're on a very mixed farm here. And whilst we were a little further up the glen earlier on, we were looking at what land management's been going on in terms of enhancing biodiversity, adding to the natural capital of the farm. We're standing here looking at some existing woodlands, some productive woodland that's been on the farm for many years.
Do the woodlands have to be a choice between biodiversity, carbon and production, or can you achieve all three in the same forest?
Well, absolutely, in the same forest and the same property. It's all about mixing production. So we've got the woodlands providing shelter for the agriculture. We've got the woodlands themselves producing tremendous timber that can be used in local markets.
Yeah, I look at these and I think red squirrels and crossbills and siskins, but they're also producing the houses of the future, aren't they?
Absolutely, and we often people look at woodlands like these and think they're relatively monoculture, but they're not. They're very mixed, not just in the tree species that we see there, but as you mentioned, the mammals, the birds, the other flora and fauna that's involved with the woodland are managed, and particularly with a managed woodland. A managed woodland has tremendous biodiversity.
Because that's where you get the deadwood and you get the structure and you get open areas, and you can control what you're doing in the management.
Absolutely, and also in terms of carbon, a lot of the talks about new woodlands and carbon sequestration and registering with the Woodland Carbon Code. And whilst these woodlands can't be registered, it's only really new woodland planting. They're existing, absolutely, but they're still locking up carbon, they're still sequestering carbon, and that carbon is not only just about what's happening in the woodland when that timber's taken away and sawn for construction, going into building projects. That carbon's locked up for many, many decades. And not only that, but it's growing timber here locally in the UK, in Scotland. We're avoiding or reducing the imports that we need. So that in itself has got a big carbon footprint, importing timber from around the globe. Not only that, but timber and construction. We're reducing the amount of carbon, steel, which are all very demanding in terms of carbon.
Yeah, I think that every tonne of carbon that's used as a timber product, I believe that's about 1.2 tonnes of carbon saved from not using the alternative materials. So it's not just about regenerative production here on the site. It's about the circular economy and the carbon benefits and the whole economy.
Absolutely, it spreads much wider than the farm or the forest that we're talking about. Absolutely.
And what about the farm? Is it are you moving away from farming if you start planting forestry, or is this a kind of Scottish agroforestry that we're seeing here? Is it going to benefit the farm production?
Absolutely. I very much look at farming, forestry, other aspects of land use in a holistic basis. So it's not about trees or sheep or arable crops. It's about a mixture, using the right piece of land on the farm for the right type of production, bringing it all together in the overall approach to managing the land.
Yeah, so we've got shelter going on, we've got diverse income streams, we've got different parcels of land used for their best purpose.
That's absolutely right, and they contribute to each other because the woodlands are providing shelter, so that's improving the agricultural production. So whilst we're standing here surrounded by the productive woodland that's been here for a number of years, and indeed there's been harvesting going on recently, we've got a great example of a piece of new woodland creation, using some of the poorer agricultural land, taking it out of agricultural production, but bringing it into new woodland creation. And this is very mixed native broadleaf woodland, which is being registered or has been registered under the Woodland Carbon Code. And so we're really taking advantage of the ability to sequester that carbon and register it, and then in due course that can be available for offsetting other aspects of the farm, or indeed selling out into the market.
And it's creating habitat as well, isn't it? We've got the more mature forest creating deadwood habitat, and the three-dimensional habitat of the forest in the background. The native woodland is going to diversify the forest and create habitat corridors to new areas.
Absolutely, yeah. And along with that, hedgerows linking up into other areas of woodland, right away up the hill onto those areas of grassland that were being diversified into species-rich grassland. So a whole avenues of hedgerows, really creating those links through the farm, allowing biodiversity to move across the whole property.
Beyond the woodland and the pasture, we've got some moorland and perhaps some deep peat, and there are new opportunities, aren't there, through the peatland carbon code to again sell offsetting credits or bank carbon.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we've had the woodland carbon code now for a good number of years, since 2013 things really kicked off. But yeah, the peatland code, whilst it's been around for a few years, it was only at the end of last year that it became part of the market registry. Just as we do with woodland carbon, we can register that under the woodland carbon code. Under the peatland carbon code, we can now register peatland that's been restored, so a little bit different. So it's not about sequestering peat, but it's about sequestering carbon. It's about reducing the carbon outputs. So re-wetting peatlands, revegetating areas of open hag, so that peatland can become, start to restore itself, reduce the carbon emissions, and again, yes, that registered carbon ultimately can be used for offsetting by the owner, or indeed traded in the market.
So this new woodland and peatland carbon under the carbon code, it's just one aspect, but it's a really crucial aspect of the net zero farm, and then more widely of the net zero economy. This is at the
absolutely,
heart of.
Absolutely. So whilst everybody's trying to reduce their outputs, there's going to be offsetting requirements as well. And woodland and peatland, great way of meeting that side of the whole net zero aspirations.
And so, how does that stack up financially? What are the financial returns from selling carbon credits?
Yeah, well, the carbon market is just beginning to really develop, and so a piece of woodland like this, native woodland, we might expect 400 and more productive, even 500 tons of carbon to be sequestered over the lifetime of the woodland. And at the moment, we're not seeing a lot of woodland carbon actually trading, but a lot of what's called the PIUs, pending issuance units, which are effectively an indication that you're going to produce that woodland carbon in the future. But they've been trading actively now, and whilst figures were in the low single figures a few years ago, we're now seeing figures in the low teens, up to £20 a unit on a regular basis, and we've heard of higher figures than that. And there was actually a really interesting article in The Economist at the end of February which indicated figures nearer to £100 a unit. So, some substantial figures coming there. In terms of peatland, there's only a handful of projects registered so far. I'm not aware of any peatland carbon units or peatland pending issuance units having been traded yet, but there's no reason why they shouldn't reach similar levels to the woodland carbon units.
And much of it's about selling the story as well as the commodity, isn't it? It's not just carbon. We've heard of charismatic carbon or sexy carbon. So yeah. It's what else you can add to your woodland or your peatland, the biodiversity.
Absolutely. I mean, the market at the moment is largely driven by it's a voluntary market, and it's all about the story that goes with it, all the great aspects of woodland creation, what it adds in terms of biodiversity, the social aspects of woodland. All that generates a story, which is what people are buying into as much as the carbon.
I'm joined here with Tom Ward-Oldham, a consultant partner working for Galbraith in Hexham, who's heading up the development of biodiversity net gain. Biodiversity, life on Earth, is a key component of our natural capital. Globally, biodiversity is threatened by climate change, pollution, and habitat loss. Natural capital management is about tackling all three across the economy. But it's habitat loss where farmers and foresters can really make a difference. But can this important public benefit translate into income?
Potentially, yes. Biodiversity net gain is a new mechanism whereby house builders, for example, must pay for the loss of habitat by creating or restoring a larger amount of habitat on or off site. To achieve this, they must persuade landowners to maintain a conservation-based environment over 30 years in return for significant payments in advance. This will be achieved through the use of conservation covenants. It's early days yet and there aren't many schemes around, but we're involved in developing 3 and are expecting instructions on several more. Under the Environment Bill, soon to become law in England, biodiversity net gain will become mandatory for any major development. In Scotland, it's still voluntary, but it allows developers to show their green credentials by working with a local landowner to offset impacts. This is now firmly on the agenda, and so landowners should act now to find out what it could mean for them as an important part of their land management toolkit.
So in the meantime, how can farmers be rewarded for creating habitat?
Well, outside of the BNG structure, biodiversity can add an indirect premium to other products. Woodland and peatland carbon, in particular, sell more easily and for significantly higher prices if they come with a strong story about wildlife and habitat restoration. The same is true for rural venues, where the customers see the farmed landscape for themselves, perhaps as holiday lets, weddings, or farm shops. Any features such as woods, hedgerows, ponds, and flower-rich meadows provide an essential backdrop to creating a place people want to visit and, importantly, to spend money.
Is there a risk then that biodiversity becomes a marketing add-on to the real farm business?
It shouldn't be. This is where we come back to regenerative production. Farmers and foresters rely on biodiversity for various essential inputs like enriching soils, bringing in pollinators, creating shelter, and natural pest control. It also brings water and nutrient cycling, plus healthy forage, but in parallel with producing essential food and timber products. This habitat restoration might not be immediately pretty, but it can make a big difference to farm businesses in lower input costs and productivity gains. It will also deliver lasting shifts to reverse biodiversity decline.
Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen to our film. We hope you have enjoyed the series of discussions. Today our film has hopefully provided a flavour of natural capital and how these assets could provide some interesting balance sheet value. But not only that, the fact that we have been managing our natural capital assets for some time. Whilst we all have more we can do, of course, we wanted to point out that this journey has already been started by many businesses. Carbon initiatives, although an element of natural capital, is somewhat different. This is the focus on sequestrating more carbon through woodland planting or the reduction in carbon emissions through peatland restoration projects or regenerative agriculture. The net zero focus will help us to have more balanced businesses when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. Whilst the focus is firstly the environment and reversing climate change, a number of businesses could find financial rewards as a pleasant surprise. We look forward to working with our clients in future, and if you have any questions regarding any of the presentations, then please do not hesitate to contact one of the team at Galbraith.